My name is Matt Tolman, and I am doing board game design full time right now. So in 2007, I was running a construction company, and one of my friends was like, "Hey, you like board games? You should come over and help me test this game." And I was like, "Sure." And so I came over and played the game, and I gave him a bunch of critical feedback, and he said, "You're pretty good at this. You should try." And I was like, well, this was right when the recession was hitting, so I was kind of bored and didn't have a lot of work, and I'm like, okay, sure. So I went home, made my first game, and showed it to him the next week, and he said, actually, next week I'm meeting with a bunch of other game designers. You should come, you should bring this game, like, it's pretty good. So then he took me to the Sentry box to meet with 11 other game designers, and I played their games, they played my game, and it was just really nice to be surrounded by a bunch of like-minded people. And so we decided to form like a formal group, and we called it the Game Artisans of Canada. And ever since then, I've been heavily involved in design and the design community here in Calgary. My first published game is called Undermining. It came out from Z-Man Games. It was just kind of a stroke of luck, really. I never even really liked the game, to be honest. But I had one of the first prototypes in Calgary among the designers that I was working with that kind of just felt like a game and worked well. So when that started working well, I sent it off to a publisher, and that was Zev at Z-Man, and he sent it back and said, it's got some potential, but there's some things wrong with it, and these are what they are. So I addressed his concerns and fired it right back to him like a week and a half later, and it was a completely different game when I sent it back, and he was impressed with how well I had integrated his criticism, and so he agreed to publish it. And then after that, I actually did a few contract games with Gavin Brown with a company we started called Applebox Games, and we did educational games. We did one for the city of Calgary, went into all the schools in Calgary, and we did one for Bayer Pharmaceuticals that taught kids with hemophilia how to transition into adulthood and start managing their own treatment. And then from that point, the publisher of the video game that inspired Undermining, called Super Motherload, contacted me, and they had read my designer diary I put up on BGG, and they said, I can't believe you made a board game based on my video game. That's so cool. I was kind of worried that he'd be upset or something, but he was just tickled that we had used his video game as inspiration for a board game, and so he wanted to meet me. So we went up to Edmonton, which was just by chance. I had no idea that he was in Edmonton until he contacted me. So I'm like, well, we're in Calgary, we'll come up and visit. So we went up to visit him, and he said, we're actually working on a sequel that's going to be a launch title for PlayStation 4. And we'd love it if you guys did like a board game version for that, and we could make it official and license it and stuff. And we said, sure, that sounds great. So we made a deal with them, and that's how Super Motherload got created, is out of that. Other projects I'm currently working on include the sequel to Brass, Brass Birmingham. I'm co-designing that with Martin Wallace and Gavin Brown, and I'm super excited to be involved with that project. It just was crazy luck that we happened into it, but me and Gavin's favorite game of all time is Brass. So when we met Martin Wallace and we knew the rights were available, we both kind of clamored to be involved somehow. And he said he was actually working on a sequel, and he was open to working with us, so we're thrilled about that. And it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly who's influenced me as a designer. I think, obviously the things I played a lot, Settlers of Catan, Puerto Rico, they have a heavy influence, but other than that, I've just tried to aim for a certain feel with my games, and I like heavy economic games. And so my earlier designs, I didn't have the design chops to even come close to doing a heavy Euro, but the more I do it, the closer I get to that point, I think. And so I try to land in a place that's similar to what Uwe Rosenberg puts out, I would say. I'm also really look up to Martin Wallace and Lada Svatil for various reasons. Martin Wallace is incredible at recreating thematic experiences, and Lada Spatil is just, I don't know, he shocks me with his originality and variation from game to game. It's like you could never guess that his games come from the same designer. The best thing about designing a game is probably when you finally have this like Eureka moment and you can take your theme and just apply it really well, and you've got the mechanics, and so you create everything and you make all the cars, you make all the buildings, tiles, whatever you need for the game, and then it just, that part's so fun because it just feels like, man, this is going so good and great. And then the worst part about design is putting that prototype on the table and playing it, because it never is any good as far as I can tell. I've heard of, like, Alan R. Moon told me about when he created Ticket to Ride. He said he was out walking his dog or something, he thought of it in his head, came home, made the game, and it was exactly the Ticket to Ride, more or less, that is in the box when you buy it. And I've certainly never experienced that. My design process usually starts with a mechanic. I try and think of a good mechanic that I could base a game around, and then I play with that mechanic in a very abstract way. One of my go-to ways to test a mechanic is actually to steal all the tiles from Raw and use them with my mechanic. So if I've come up with like some sort of shipping mechanic there where the players are trying to set up shipping lines, I'll throw the raw tiles at the end of those lines so they can get them when they put the proper shipping line in place. I do this because I think it's a great basis to give everyone like differing goals, that they want the same things but not the same amount, and it's just a good way to test if the mechanic has any merit. And then if it does, then I proceed to the next step, which is I try to figure out, okay, what does this mechanic thematically feel like? Like, what are we doing, and what kind of theme could I apply it to where it would just feel intuitive? And then from that point, I just start designing the content and see where it takes me. If you're starting out in design, I think there's a real tendency to do a few things. Art is, it's like, well, I'm an aesthetic person, so I really like a game that looks good. Like, I love it. Any Hans and Gluck game, I'm just like immediately tilted in favor of, just because there's so much polish in the look and cohesion, and the graphic design is top notch. So that really helps me. So when I started designing, I always wanted to make my prototypes look as polished as possible, just because I knew how much it contributed to my experience with the game. And so I wanted to feel how it would feel as a published game, so I could get a good gauge on what it's actually going to feel like. Then as the years went on, I started to realize that it's almost nice to have the handicap of an ugly looking game that is suffering from looking like a prototype, because then I'm not wasting my time because the game feels better than it should. Like, it's everything's stripped away on an ugly prototype. So now all my prototypes are ugly, and it's not being propped up by the look. So you can really kind of quickly cut to the chase and see, is this game just so much fun that I want to play it even if it looks like a spreadsheet? And so that's something I really aim for. So honestly, my advice to new designers is attack game design head on. Don't try and skirt your way in on the sidelines. Make a good game, playtest it properly, blind playtest, then send it to publishers. They will send it back. You'll get great feedback. I think the best thing you can do is just go straight at it and not be afraid of failure, because that's the only way you're going to get better, is getting criticism from people who are experienced and then incorporating it. Game design as a practice is your ability to interpret and integrate criticism properly into your designs. That is all there is to it, really. Another good tip for game designers that I've learned myself is you have to know when to stop playing. everyone just keeps playing, and really the purpose of playtesting is to learn what you need to change. So a lot of times that can be 5 minutes, and it makes it so much faster to get through the development process if you cut every time you learn what you set out to. So you should always stop immediately once you've learned what you wanted to learn, which leads me into the other side of this, which is, I guess, always have a specific goal for a playtest. What are you trying to learn? Make it a conscious effort to learn that, and once you've learned, stop. I think a general trend in the gaming industry right now is underdevelopment, actually. A lot of games I play are just like, wow, it's such a great idea. I wish that it was finished. It's getting really easy to publish games, and there's just more publishers than ever and more games coming out than ever. And also I think the board game geek community has clued people into the fact that designers exist and it's a thing you can do, so a lot of people are picking it up, and there's a glut of games. I don't know the actual numbers, but I know it's like in excess of about 600 games a year being released, and I actually think that's having a really negative effect on the hobby overall. It's hard for stores to know which games to stock, and it's also hard for customers to know which games to buy, especially customers who are new to the hobby. Like, the core gamers are always going to do their research, and they're going to pick games that they're generally going to be, they're going to be up their alley. They're going to like it when they get it home. But an average customer walks into the Sentry box, there's so many games on the shelves, and a lot of them aren't that great. And so what you're going to have is their initial experiences won't be that great, and so they won't be roped in the way they could, I guess, if our industry was a little more picky on what we put on the shelf. I also, who can talk about trends in gaming without mentioning Kickstarter? It's obviously a big deal right now, and I think it's also contributing to that problem. It's now even easier to get funding, which you don't need a lot of, but now anyone can get it almost, and as long as your idea sounds good. So Kickstarter is contributing to this glut of games, and a lot of people are starting to get turned off by Kickstarter because they'll receive the game and it's just not that great. But again, I think since the industry is just growing on the whole, the growth is outpacing the people who are being turned off. But I would like to see better quality experience on average. I don't know how to do that. I think board games are really important to a lot of people, and I think the reason that hobby games is always growing as an industry is because people are tired of being plugged in, and I grew up on video games. I love video games, still play them all the time, but when you're sitting in front of a computer in an office all day, you don't exactly just want to go home and sit in front of a computer at your home for the rest of the day. So I think what board games give you is just that nice analog feel, real social interaction with other people. I think that's why the hobby industry just continues to grow at the rate it does.